Hello, welcome to Revision Tips for CIPS Level 4 Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 4, Ethical and Responsible Sourcing, and it's Learning Outcome 4, which is to understand ethical and responsible sourcing. We'll look at the impact of international ethical standards and the practices that support ethical procurement, comparing the use of audits and other feedback mechanisms to evaluate ethical standards, and contrast the processes and practices that an organisation should adopt to meet the requirements of CSR. So CIPS cite ethical responsibility and sustainable practices as two key principles that underpin the way business should be conducted. Organisations and the individuals within them can make a real difference to the lives and futures of the people on our planet. Procurement specialists need to understand the difference they can make and not only take advantage of opportunities to trade more ethically and sustainably, but work to create opportunities to trade more ethically and sustainably. So we look at ethical responsibilities and sustainable practices and the difference that responsible organisations can make. And what about you? The difference you can make. So as procurement professionals, we can be entrusted with large sums of money, and with money comes temptation. Now, being corrupt can have repercussions that are much wider than just the loss of a career. It could be the loss of your own personal freedom, and could also result in people working under conditions of modern slavery and being in fear of their lives on a daily basis. So it's really important that we conduct ourselves appropriately, reasonably, and sustainably. So what is corruption? It's essentially the abuse or misuse of a person's entrusted position, their power or authority for personal gain. And in procurement, this could include a person with authority agreeing to give a specific supplier a contract before a fair competitive tender has been carried out, making it unfair. It's important that you know that your organisation's policy, and you must ensure that you abide by it. Don't let a small gift ruin your career. And as a member of CIPS, you're also committed to abiding by the CIPS Code of Conduct. So you need to understand what your organisation's policy is. And do you know how you should do it if you suspect a colleague is accepting gifts or hospitality that's against your company policy? And have you ever read the CIPS Code of Conduct? If not, I would suggest you go to the CIPS website and have a look. But the UK Bribery Act establishes that companies' liability for corporate acts that are committed by persons acting on the person's behalf, on the company's behalf. But the Act prohibits bribery of public officials and business-to-business bribery, and it has global jurisdiction. So companies can be held liable in the UK for acts of corruption committed by employees against anywhere in the world. And the Bribery Act provides a full legal defence where a company has implied adequate procedures prior to an offence. And this can be established through adherence to the 6 principles. Now here we can see some examples of fraud. Corrupt fraud is often reflected as, among other things, qualifying an unqualified or untested company to bid or be a vendor, improper or non-competitive contract awards, and paying too much for goods or services. Collusive bidding is also known as bid rigging and will drive up the prices in an effective industry. It's most common in industries with high start-up and entry costs and relatively few bidders, such as road construction, paving and waste disposal. Then we've got invoicing fraud, where suppliers or contractors can intentionally submit false, duplicated or inflated invoices. The scheme can involve a contractor acting alone or in collusion with an employee or a victim organisation who shares in the profits. A supplier or contractor can submit substitute products or materials of a lesser quality than what's specified in the contract, or use counterfeit, defective or used parts. And that's in order to increase profits and comply with contract scheduled times. And finally, contractors or suppliers can submit false information about their employees, saying that they've got the right credentials or experience, or invoice for goods and services that have never been delivered. Or they can charge you for higher quality items than what was provided, or make a variety or other false statement or claim. So CIPS categorise fraud in a number of ways, and sadly many of these can often apply to us as individuals. Think of the builder that asked for money to buy materials up front but never came back to actually do the work. We all now have to be careful to protect ourselves from identity fraud. So you need to shred your personal information. There are far too many stories in the newspapers of individuals being targeted for fraud. The world of the internet has increased the ability for people to commit fraud, cybercrime. We also need to be vigilant at home and at work about the authenticity of emails, not opening anything that seems dubious and checking email addresses to check that they appear genuine. Remember, act in haste, repent in leisure. Taking that minute to think before opening an email could pay dividends. But there are 3 reasons why people commit fraud. Pressure on individuals can come from many forms. For example, an unexpected adverse circumstances involving unexpected expense, poor money management. Just because we manage budgets at work doesn't automatically mean that we can manage our own household budgets. Or it could be addictions, or feeling like we have no other option. And sadly, some people just can't resist the opportunity to commit fraud. Hence all the rules and regulations and procedures we need to adhere to. But if there is still an opportunity to commit the fraud, some people will take advantage of that. And then we hear people say things like, if I do it just this once, it'll be okay. I'll be fine by then. But there's no other option. They've got millions. They've won. They won't even notice. They don't care about me. Why should I care about them? And these are just some ways that people rationalise fraud. But it can never be worth losing your job for, your reputation and potentially your freedom. Now, as we know, corruption is that abuse or misuse of a person's trusted position. And as we know, in procurement, that can include a person with authority agreeing to give a specific supplier a contract before running a competitive tender. Bribery is the corruption exchange of something of value, and that's known as a bribe, and by one party in order to secure a desirable outcome for another. So let me give you some examples. Within procurement, a potential supplier might offer a gift or a hospitality to a buyer in exchange for being awarded a contract. It defies ethical practice because it's a barrier to fair competition. Bribes may also go by the name in an attempt to make it sound more official and ethically acceptable, such as facilitation or grease payments. In some countries, bribes may be more readily accepted as a business norm, so you do need to be careful when international supply chains are involved. Responsible supply chain professionals must reject all forms of bribery and seek advice where cases of bribery are known or suspected. Then we've got gift giving. In some cultures, this is considered a normal business practice, and the people giving the gifts might not intend them to be bribes. And refusing the gift could cause offence to the giving party, but accepting the gift could be perceived as accepting a bribe. So protecting employees, organisations have a gift and hospitality policy that outlines when it's appropriate to accept a gift, what types of gifts are not acceptable, and how to proceed depending on the value of the gift. Fraud is deliberately misleading or telling lies to a person to achieve an outcome that they desire at the victim's expense. And reasons why people commit fraud, as we can see on the screen and I've already discussed, is perceived pressure, an opportunity, and some rationalisation. Now here we can see a few organisations that are associated with human rights. the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Equality and Human Rights Commission. But now to focus on modern slavery. Modern slavery, which is forcing adults or children to carry out labour against their will, may be a result of perceived debt owed by the employer or individuals, which they then must work to pay off, potentially with no end. An individual may be threatened with violence against them and their families, or someone may be promised a life with better prospects in another country and are then enslaved through human trafficking networks. It can be easily hidden beneath tiers of the supply chain and can take place in any country. So procurement professionals will need to be vigilant and look out for signs that slavery might be taking place. The potential indicators of slavery may include suppliers based in poor nations with low CPI scores, suspiciously low labour cost, fluctuations in the quality, or some evidence that the workers live on site. Workers unwilling to make eye contact, poor workmanship, fewer labourers with long shifts, or a UK-based supplier without a published anti-slavery statement. But if a buyer suspects modern-day slavery, you can carry out your due diligence checks, check the code of conduct documents that have been provided by the supplier, and UK-based buyers can contact the Modern Slavery Helpline for advice. So Fair Trade is an international charity that works to benefit small-scale farmers and workers who are among the most marginalised groups globally. And they do it through trade rather than aid to enable them to maintain their livelihoods and reach their full potential. Do look out for the Fair Trade logo on products in supermarkets. We can support the work of charities such as Fair Trade at work and at home. And if you haven't already done so, take a look at the Fair Trade Association's website for interesting and informative resources. But it's all about creating opportunities for those producers, having integrity and building capacity, making sure the developer has their own independence. It's fair payment and better working conditions, giving us equality for both gender and children, and doing things that are better environmental practices. So on to the CIPS Code of Conduct. As a member, you've agreed to adhere to this. But the first part is to enhance and protect the standing of the profession. So this is by acting in a manner that doesn't bring the CIPS profession into disrepute. It doesn't just cover how you act at work, but includes your personal life, where appropriate actions could have a negative impact on others' perception of you as a professional. Specifically, the rule advises that you should not accept gifts or hospitality, as these could be perceived as an unethical acceptance of bribes. The second part of the code is to maintain the highest standards of integrity in all your business relationship by not using your authority for personal gain, by challenging improper business practices, and by promoting honesty in all aspects of the work you carry out. It advises you that you shouldn't disclose any confidential information that's entrusted to you. The third part says to promote the eradication of any unethical business practices, and this is by promoting and protecting human rights, responsibility in challenging business relationships where unethical practices have been found, and abstaining from modern-day slavery, fraud and other forms of corruption. But it also states that due diligence should be done to support you in identifying any unethical business practices so that you can manage that situation. The fourth is to enhance the proficiency and stature of the profession. So here you need to do continued professional development. Continue to develop your knowledge of the subjects. But it also requires you to use the resources for which you are responsible for the benefit of the organisation in a responsible way. And finally, to ensure full compliance with the laws of the land and by following CIPS professional guidance. Now, in addition to the CIPS Code of Conduct and legislation, there are various organisations that develop a wide range of voluntary codes and standards. So we've got codes of conduct or codes of ethics, and they refer to an expected way of behaving. Standards refer to a particular level that a supplier has achieved, and notes that codes of conduct and standards are in the context of supply chains and similar, and so these terms are often used interchangeably. But standards can be subdivided in several ways. Those based on minimum standards and those that go beyond, those that are independently verified, and those that apply to an organisation like the ISO, and those that apply to a product. Those that are involved in supplier representatives and worker representatives in the settings and governance of the standards. Audits can take place at various points during the procurement process and may often be part of the contract management process as well. Now, in the PQQ pre-qualification questionnaire, we assess the compatibility of a supplier. It does provide us with information that allows us to identify whether the supplier has the capacity to deliver a contract, whether they share your ethical values, and helps you to identify risks at an early stage. It gives you the opportunity to filter out unsuitable suppliers before you enter into a contract. And that will protect you against reputational damage, wasted time and money, and potential late deliveries. Suppliers can be assessed on their commitment to things like social criteria, environmental criteria, and ethical criteria. And due diligence should be carried out on all suppliers, even if you receive favourable responses at this stage. So on here you can see an extract from the Quick Start Guide to the Bribery Act 2010. There's lots of information about the Act and the Act itself, including some informational videos that you can see on the government website. But having undertaken due diligence and awarding a contract, when we have to ensure that everything is happening in a way it was contracted to happen and will continue to positively develop going forward. So, you will not commit the offence or failing to prevent bribery if you can show that your organisation has adequate procedures to prevent it. What counts as adequate will depend on the bribery risk you face. And if there's little risk of bribery being committed on your behalf, you may not feel the need for any procedures to prevent bribery. If, having assessed the position, there is a risk and you want to rely on defence, the procedures you adopt should be appropriate to that risk. Performance management is next, and why do we measure? So performance management is the process of developing measurable indicators that can be systematically tracked to assess progress made in achieving predetermined goals, such as indicators to assess programs in achieving these goals. But why do we measure? Well, they help us to assess the progress in achieving the stated goals, understand what impact we're having, whether that's positive or negative, learn from our successes and failures, and acquire more information to help us make decisions. And here we can see some potential benefits of using key performance indicators. However, as with most things, while there are benefits, advantages, there are also some disadvantages. So, for example, they can be inadvertently promoting dysfunctional behaviour. So it's important to set the right KPIs and the right number, not too many, to be effectively monitored. So the benefits are you get increased and improved results, motivation to achieve or surpass the level. It supports a collaborative buyer-supplier relationship. And you've got the ability to directly compare year on year. It focuses on the key areas of critical success and clearly defined sharing goals to facilitate cross-functional teamwork. Now, audits can be carried out by the procuring organisation or by a contracted third party. And if audits are undertaken by the buyer, they can do their own form of assessment of the practices within a supplier's workplace, and then decide whether or not they believe the supplier operates in an ethical and sustainable manner. Assess any other concerns like quality and production. But audits are generally conducted on the supplier's premises, and the auditor needs the support of the supplier's senior employees to ensure they have access to any required areas, such as their employees and documents. Structured around a series of questions that are aligned to contract requirements and any international standards or regulations, which may include interviews with members of staff in relevant positions. But it's generally carried out as scheduled ongoing occasional activities and may take place following a failure of some kind. Focuses on the problem and the elements that they believe have contributed to it. So to reduce the risk of it being misled, a buyer can give the supplier very little or no warning that an audit is taking place to ensure they don't have time to prepare for what they believe the auditor would like to see. But before the audit takes place, the lead auditor should set out the scope of the audit, such as the timescales, the period of time to be reviewed in retrospect, the teams and functions that it will be focused on, the scope of work or activities that it will focus on, and which processes will be taken into consideration, and any other elements required to have clearly defined boundaries. So in many ways, corporate social responsibility can be summed up as being a good corporate citizen, taking care of profit, but not at the expense of the people or the planet, or at least to minimise the impact on the people and planet. Now, CIPS refers to sustainability as being one of the best ways for an organisation to display a good commitment to corporate social responsibility. Now, corporate social responsibility is according to the demonstration of ethical behaviours carried out by an organisation and can be closely scrutinised by its external stakeholders. It recognises that the organisation has additional responsibilities for which it could be held accountable for, beyond the main considerations of making a profit. Now, there are three aspects or pillars of the sustainable development: the social ones, the environmental ones, and the economic ones. Social ones is how an activity impacts on people, relationships, cultures, laws, and political situations. Environmental is the activities and how they impact on the ecosystems, environments, and the abundance of natural resources. And economically, it's how any activity impacts on the finances or resources of our individuals, our organisations, markets, and national economies. Now, the triple bottom line concept that was developed by John Elkington shows that they follow the same principles of sustainability. So it considers performance against three factors, which are all important value streams in an organisation. So it looks at the three Ps: the profit, the people, and the planet. And you can link this to the pillars that you can see on the screen. So the profit aspect is economic, the people is the social, and the planet is the environment. But profit has the economic focus of an organisation, and it focuses on the generalisation of financial wealth. People is the organisation's social cultural focus on those it directly affects and indirectly affects, including the people it employs, the communities it operates in, and the markets it sells to its customers. And the planet will focus on the impact of the environment, which could include ecosystems, groundwater contamination, and over-extraction of resources. So if a company monitors and promotes the factors that make up that triple bottom line, it will be able to be more easily understood, and its financial, social, and environmental performance will also be easily understood. As an important part as a supply chain professional, you'll be making decisions which could play an important part in determining whether or not procurement activities are sustainable. So with the products you purchase, there are potential impacts at 3 of the following stages. During manufacture, so how efficient is your supplier's manufacturing process? Are there any harmful byproducts? Are the resources extracted under conflict circumstances? And are manufacturing extracting staff, are they protected from harm? And the second stage is in use, so during the storage or when used in further manufacture. Does it need to be stored in a particular way or handled in a particular way, or even used in a particular way to prevent it from causing harm? And the third stage is at the point of disposal. Is the product made from a material that can be recycled? How long does it take to biodegrade? Does it require special disposal? And is there a potential for damage to our ecosystems or harm to health if incorrectly disposed of? Here you can see the triple bottom line, which I mentioned on the sustainability slide. And it focuses on an organisation not just as an economic value, but also the environmental and social value that it can add or destroy. So for example, disposing of a fixed asset can have impact on people, planet and profit. And traditionally, business leaders concern themselves with the bottom line being in monetary terms. But today, more leaders have begun to think more sustainably. So it is an accounting framework to include 2 other performance areas. And these triple bottom lines are often referred to as the 3 Ps: people, planet, profit. So we're now going to look at overcoming some of the costs and barriers associated with responsible procurement and how responsible procurement can actually reduce costs. Now, Berry states that sustainable procurement is about doing business more efficiently and that it shouldn't cost no more and should actually achieve a cost saving. But it may also provide community benefits over the life of the goods, services or works, because there is this perception that sustainable procurement costs more and it will prevent the buyer from being a bit more sustainable in its procurement. But you need to understand that it is possible to achieve value for money while delivering social and environmental benefits to the wider society. So here you might be able to reduce costs with sustainability, getting cheaper prices for some of the products because they're recycled, or some productivity gains from health and safety, workforce stability and morale, reduction in water and being more resource efficient, or a burden of compliance and regulations. It helps with your supplier relationships, resulting in a more collaborative, efficient improvement, which ultimately will reduce the risk and failure costs. You may also make savings through whole life cost efficiencies when you take into account things like maintenance costs and quality and durability. It reduces the cost of capital by increasing appeals to the investors and lenders. And you can reduce costs of compliance because you don't have liabilities and contract disputes. Now, the social impacts of what we do can be external or internal and either positive or negative. So, for example, some internal negative effects could be employees working in unsafe conditions or working excessive hours where their human rights are violated. But some external negative effects could be suppliers using slave labour or NHS hospitals starting to charge for parking, which causes difficulties for those living near hospitals who are no longer able to park near their homes. So procurement can make a difference. Planning ethics and sustainability into your procurement cycle at the beginning can make a real difference to the triple bottom line. And not caring about ethics and sustainability in procurement can again make a real difference to the triple bottom line. So let's look at the next and final slide. Which side of the slide do you want to be on? You really can make a difference to your own future, the future of the planet and the future of others. So don't let your organisation's name appear on the right-hand column. And you can find out more about these on the suppliers' websites. But the good ones here are people like Unilever, who have a strategic partnership with Oxfam, or Xerox, who in 2018 were named as one of the world's most ethical companies for the 12th consecutive year. Or the bad side, like Colgate Palmolive, top of the league for the companies that are buying tainted palm oil. Or Amazon, who in 2018 were scored as 0 out of 20 by the ethical consumer, probably due to the packaging that they add when they deliver to you. But that's the end of Learning Outcome 4. Thank you for watching.